Hey everybody, I'm going to get started talking about the causes of World War One today, um, and we'll get into how it began and everything like that as quickly as possible today. Okay, uh, so you should have already done the assignment about the Mexican Revolution and the Chinese Revolution. Both of those are happening at the same time as this. Um, but that's just important to get into. What else is happening in the world at this time, in addition to the actual world war that's happening. Okay, so you'll see this in your weekly reading this week on chapter 29, which I just posted today. So mid through next week you should have that turned in. But so you'll see more about World War One. We're gonna basically focus on the causes today. Okay, um, so in the early 20th century, uh, you have Europeans who are really dominating the world at this point. Europeans, or people with European ancestry, largely controlled the entire world through their formal empires or informal influence. So you've got Europeans like Great Britain, France, Germany, um, the United States, European ancestry. Um, so the largest part of the population is European ancestry, obviously. And this would they controlled a lot of the world. The people building empires during this time are pretty much all uh, at least majority European ancestry. Um, so so the Europeans are dominating the world in the early 20th century, and this would all change over the next few decades. And this is where all that starts to change. And besides the fact that World War One was a European war, this really, it really sets Europe back, as we'll see in some later lessons. So, so this is really the turning point when the world becomes less European dominated, um, and and more the balance of power begins to shift to other places in the world. Okay, so so there's at this point rivalry and competition between European states that continued throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. So you have a lot of competition between these states because of their powerful empires, and their empires kind of coming to head with each other. Um, so especially in Europe, I mean, European wars were constant. Um, During this time, and there was even in 1815, there's a fragile peace in Europe that was barely being maintained after the defeat of Napoleon and his empire in 1815. So they had the Congress of Vienna, which was an international meeting to redraw European boundaries, and this was an attempt to create a peaceful balance of power in Europe. But soon after that, about 50 years after that, rivalries and competition intensified with the unification of Italy and Germany in 1871. So we've talked a little bit before about the rise of nationalism in Europe, and in the West in general, with different states wanting, or different people groups wanting to form their own nation, instead of being it's in the case of Italy and Germany, they want to unify what are considered Germanic peoples or Italian peoples into one state, and have a nation of Italy and a nation of Germany, which did not exist before. They were in much smaller states until then. Um, so in 1871, that happens, and that kind of fuels the rivalries, the competition even more, because now you've got much larger states, and then there's all the problems that come with come with redrawing the boundaries there. Uh, but this all leads us into the main causes of World War One, and it really helps to use the acronym, acrostic. I always forget acronym. I think is what this is for the acronym MAIN to talk about the causes of World War One. So that stands for militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Okay, militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Those are the four main causes of World War One. The four things that led us into World War One. Now, uh, there's one event that kind of lit the the spark that lit the fire of World War One that we'll talk about, but you can't really say that. I mean, that was the direct cause, but there were much deeper causes, and these are the four much deeper causes that kind of set all that going. Okay, so why is alliances first? Do I not have militarism here? Why do I not have a slide for militarism? I know I had one. Just one second. Okay, I've I've made my new slide now, so we're so we're good. I don't know why I didn't have that before. All right, so the main causes of World War One were militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. That spells out the word main. So that can be really helpful for you to for you to remember that. Okay. All right. So the first one is militarism. Okay, militarism is defined as glorification and expansion of the military. Okay, so not only is the I mean not only is the military kind of expanded and the military gets bigger, but it's glorified in some way. Like military service is glorified and talked about in this great way and encouraged by the government and all that stuff, right? So I mean you can probably think of examples of militarism like military parades are a really good example of this, which we don't have in the United States. Or people, the army's marching down the street, right? That's an example of militarism. It's kind of glorifying the military, but you also are expanding the military. Okay, so during this time, countries began, and this is pre World War One, 1850s to 1910 ish. Countries began to build up their militaries and spend money on military training. Okay, so you're spending a lot more money on the military. Your military is getting bigger. Many countries also began what's called conscription, which is the draft of civilians into the military. This is pretty new, at least for the modern world, where you draft civilians into the military. You choose certain people, or not. Sorry, you kind of choose randomly, but usually with some uh, with some what am I trying to say? Some restrictions about who can be drafted into the military, and you draft civilians into the military instead of it being made up of volunteers or everyone. If every male in society joins the military, that's not conscription. Um, that's something else. I don't know what to call that. But so many countries began conscription, where you draft civilians into the military, military draft, like you've probably heard of before, um, uh, and and that starts during this time. Okay, the domino, or then that starts a domino effect. When one country enhanced its military, other countries then started to do the same. Okay, so this creates a domino effect where one country builds their military, the next country over is like, oh, we better build our military too, and so on and so forth, until everybody has really large militaries and everybody's spending a bunch of money on military training, and everybody's drafting civilians into the military. They're using conscription, all those things, right? So that starts that's one thing where everybody has these large militaries and everybody's willing to fight a war with them. That is one of the main causes of World War One, as we'll see. That comes into play in a second. Then another one is the alliance systems that existed at the time, or alliances. Okay, alliance systems are defensive agreements among nations, basically saying that hey, if we get attacked, you're going to defend us, right? So we'll defend each other if we get attacked. Um, so in general, that means if one of these countries goes to war, then all of them in that whole alliance system is going to go to war, right? Because chances are that settles will say if they want to, they'll say, oh, even if they attacked first, they'll say no, we were just defending ourselves from your attacks in the first place, right? So it's even though they're defensive agreements, instead of joining, if if your side attacks first, it really just ends up being everybody in this alliance system is going to end up in war if one of us ends up in war. So there are there are two major alliance systems in Europe, that are about that happened in the late 1800s and continue into the 1900s until World War One. So those two major alliance systems you need to know the names of, and you need to know who is in these systems, and that is the Triple Alliance, which is Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, and the Triple Entente, which is Great Britain, Russia, and France. Here's how I remember these. The Triple Alliance has Austria Hungary in it, okay? And so if you can remember that Germany and Italy are on the same side, that's great. And then the Triple Entente has, Entente is a French word. So the Triple Entente has France in it, okay? Entente sounds like a French word, right? Um, and it is a French word. So France is in the Triple Entente, and then if you can remember, Great Britain and Russia are with them. Great, right? Um, so so those are the two major alliance systems, and these are the most powerful countries in Europe at the time. Spain and Portugal aren't doing too well. Um, Belgium is kind of powerful, but they're small. And then you've got a bunch of smaller countries in the Balkans and and all that, right? But these are the major European powers at the time are in the Triple Alliance or the Triple Entente, and they're allied. They're allied with each other. But if two of these countries, one from the Triple Alliance and one from the Triple Entente, were to go to war with each other, that means all six of these major powers and major imperial powers in the world are going to go to war with each other, and that's gonna lead to crazy places. So here we go. That's the alliances portion. Um, and then the next one is imperialism. Okay, imperialism we talked about for the whole last unit. And so this there's so that should say Europe instead of European. Europe had imperialist rivalries since the 1800s. They tried to keep from going to war with each other over their empires, but really, they had these rivalries about who owned this land and who had the rights to this colony and all this stuff that's been happening for over 100 years now. Right, yeah, over 100 years now. um, and and they're competing for territory and economic power all over the world: Africa, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, China, the Balkans. Right? You've got all these places around the entire world that they're fighting for power. So competition turned to hostility and conflict as Europeans got in each other's way as they're building their empires in Africa, in China, in Southeast Asia. You've got all this competition over land and over who's going to have this military and economic power all over the world. That leads to these really intense rivalries. That plays a role as well. So imperialism is the third one that plays a big role, and the last one is nationalism. Nationalism was huge in starting World War One as well, because nationalism had unified Germany and Italy, right, two of those major powers, and it was becoming more popular. And so everyone's like, hey, Germany and Italy made their own nations. Nationalism is really growing all over the place. So the idea that a people group can uh, join together into a nation, and your nation can be based not just on whoever the government is, but on a people group and a culture and all that stuff. That's very powerful during this time, and a lot of people want that, and they want to be unified with other people in their people groups, or they want to kind of separate from other people in the country and make their own nation. Um, so the French wanted Alsace and Lorraine back from Germany. A lot of culturally French. It's a culturally French area, and they wanted that territory back because they considered it part of their nation. In the Austrian Empire, nationalism was creating the most violent tensions in Europe. So the Austrian Empire, or Austro-Hungarian Empire, if you want to call it that, was had all these different people groups in it, because in Eastern Europe, especially in the Balkans, you have people who identify under different people groups. But but a lot of them are what we call Slavs. Okay. Um, and Slavs are Russians are Slavs. A lot of Eastern European peoples identify into the Slavic people group. So one major thing happening during this time is what's called PanSlavism. Okay, this is a major ideology at the time, which is essentially Slavic nationalism. They wanted to create a one all Slavic state, which included Russia and Serbia and Montenegro and I've forgotten a lot of the different countries that were in this, but all made up of, I guess, different what are now countries that are made up of this, but they're all different Slavic people groups that wanted to unite into one empire. So where Russia could could unite with all these other Slavic people in the Balkans, and they could unite under one empire and and become more powerful that way. That was creating a lot of tension in the Austrian Empire, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, because so many of the people in their empire are Slavic. So they wanted to essentially break off and create their own nation with Russia. Um, so, so there were many Slavic people in the Austrian and Russian empires, and there were many Slavic people in the Balkans, which was a region once controlled by the Ottoman Empire, and it was now falling apart. So this area right here is what we call the Balkans. Um, yeah. Okay. So, so this was part of the Ottoman Empire. Sorry, this was part of the Ottoman Empire at one point, but now the Ottoman Empire is falling apart. The Ottoman Empire plays a small role in World War One, but it's not very powerful at this time. So it's not able to really do very much. Um, but so even in 1912, this is part of the Ottoman Empire, but then it gets taken over by Serbia and Bulgaria and Macedonia, or and I guess Greece from there. Um, so so that becomes a very a very um, tense part of the world, because you've got all these different empires and all these different people groups wanting different things to happen with this area of the Balkans right here. Um, so the major country in favor of Pan-Slavism is the country of Serbia. So Serbia had a lot of of a lot of Slavs there, and they wanted to join to become more powerful with these other majority Slavic nations. Um, so you've got all of these different um, factors here. You've got an arms race. Remember militarism. They're building their militaries higher and higher. You've got the nationalist movements going on. You've got Pan-Slavism and the Triple Alliance, the Triple Entente. You've got all these different things happening all at the same time, and this is like kindling to the fire of World War One. So if the fire is World War One, This is all the stuff that's just like building up to it. Makes it to where all it's going to take is one spark, and the fire is going to catch. Um, so so this is this becomes a very, it's like a powder keg just waiting to explode, right? And that's what happens with the spark of World War I. Okay, so the so the spark of World War I happens on June 28th, 1914, when the Archduke Francis Ferdinand, who was heir to the throne in Austria-Hungary, he was assassinated. Okay, so so he's heir to the throne. He's not the king. He's the heir to the throne in Austria-Hungary. He's assassinated. Um, uh, his wife Sophie was also killed, and they were murdered while they were in Sarajevo, which is the capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Okay, Bosnia-Herzegovina was a territory controlled by Austria-Hungary, had a very big Slavic population. Okay, so you've got Austria-Hungary and the Austro-Hungarian Empire controlling this area. Had a very very big Slavic population. So remember, PanSlavism, really important here. Okay, they were murdered by a guy named Gavrilo Princip, who's a member of the Black Hand. It's a secret Slavic nationalist group, terrorist group, you could call it. And actually, the Black Hand has different arms kind of in different places. It's really active in Italy as well. But here it's a Slavic nationalist group that's um, that had planned this to murder the Archduke. Okay, so so they so anyway they're both, the Archduke and his wife, are killed by Gavrilo Princip, and there's a really fun story about this, believe it or not. So I'm going to tell you real quick why World War I started with a sandwich. Okay, we don't know it was a sandwich, probably not actually a sandwich based on what we know, but it's more fun if it was a sandwich. So I'm going to tell it this way, and this is the story that goes around, right? Gavrilo Princip was planning to kill the Archduke and his wife, and the first attempt he had at it was unsuccessful. I don't remember. I think maybe they went. I forget what exactly happened, but it was unsuccessful. I wish I could remember that part of the story right now. So so whatever happened that first time, the Gavrilo Princip goes to get a sandwich from a local deli, and he's dejected. He's like, oh man, I missed my chance to assassinate the Archduke and his wife, but he's still got his gun with him and everything. But what he decides, well, he decides he wants a sandwich after that. That's what he decides. But by a quirk of history, what happens is the Archduke's car goes right by where Gavrilo Princip now is after the first murder attempt was unsuccessful, and now, which I think the first one was more coordinated by the Black Hand as a whole group, but now Gavrilo Princip has his second chance, so he runs up and shoots the Archduke and his and his wife in their car. Just because they happened to be driving by after the first one had been unsuccessful. So, moral of the story is, if he hadn't gone for that exact sandwich at that exact place, then maybe World War I wouldn't have happened. Who knows? Or maybe it would have just happened completely differently. All right, so so what happens after this? Why did this set off such a big thing? I mean, one person murdering one murdering one other person, even if that person's pretty important. Why would that start a war? So they started blaming Serbia because he was a Serbian nationalist, right? He was from Serbia. He was a Slavic nationalist. So Austria-Hungary started blaming Serbia for this assassination. So they approached Germany and made sure that Germany would support it if it took action against Serbia. Remember, they're in an alliance together. Germany and Austria-Hungary are in this alliance together. So Austria-Hungary says, "Hey, Germany, could you support us if we go to war with Serbia?" And Germany promised a blank check of support. Okay. Now, I know you all don't really use checks anymore, but just for context, a blank check, if you give someone a blank check, which means like you just sign it and don't put any number on it, they can put whatever number they want there, and cash the check. So you don't give somebody a blank check, because they can just make it say whatever it wants, and then get however much money they want from you. So Germany, this is a metaphor. Germany promised a blank check of support, said, "Hey, we'll support you no matter what," unconditional and full support for whatever they did. So Austria-Hungary said, "Yeah, okay, let's let's go to war." Essentially, Austria-Hungary gave Serbia an ultimatum, which they said, "You have to let Austro-Hungarian officials into the country to stop all violent nationalist movements. So any Slavic nationalist movements, you've got to let us into the country to stop." And Serbia's like, "No, right?" Serbia also must let Austro-Hungarian officials into the country to investigate the assassination. Serbia said, "No, okay, not going to happen. You're not going to come into our country and try to stop these nationalist movements and cause problems in our country." So Serbia's like, "No, can't do that." So on July 28th, just a month after the assassination, July 28th, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Then both countries after that started mobilization. They start preparing their military for war. Mobilization takes a while at this time because the military is so large. So you have to now prepare your military for war and get started. Then Russia begins to mobilize too. They supported Serbia because they supported PanSlavism, because hey, Russia has lots of Slavs too, so this would be really good for Russia if there was a it might even become part of Russia if there is a pan-Slavic nation like they wanted. Then France began to mobilize to support Russia because France and Russia are in the same alliance. Remember, Serbia is not in that alliance, but Russia is. So France mobilized to support Russia. Germany gave Russia and France an ultimatum. Okay, so Germany said, "Hey, Russia and France, you better stop mobilizing, or we'll go to war with you." And they didn't stop. So then Germany declares war on Russia and France. See what's happening here? Germany is supporting Austria-Hungary. France is supporting Russia. Russia is supporting Serbia. Great Britain tried to stay neutral for a while, but then they weren't able to stay neutral either. Here's why. In August 1914, Germany, who has now declared war on France and Russia, they invaded neutral Belgium in order to get to France. And they had this great plan called the Schlieffen Plan, where they were trying to avoid a two-front war. So they were going to take out France real quick and then go get Russia after that. So anyway, that doesn't work. But they have this great plan, and in order to do that, they've got to go through Belgium, which was a neutral country. So Belgium being neutral, Great Britain wasn't very happy that they invaded Belgium. So this led Great Britain to declare war on Germany. They didn't like that Germany was getting so close to them. They didn't like that Germany was invading neutral countries. So then Great Britain declares war on Germany from there, because they had invaded Belgium and gotten real close to just across the channel from Great Britain. So other nations joined the war from there. For the Central Powers, formerly the Triple Alliance, so this is Germany, Austria-Hungary, yeah, and then the Ottoman Empire joins them. Bulgaria joins them. Oh, Italy was the third one. So we've got Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, and then Ottoman Empire joins the Central Powers. Bulgaria joins the Central Powers. And then you have the Allied Powers, which were formerly the Triple Entente. So the Triple Entente becomes what's called the Allied Powers. So Triple Alliance doesn't become the Allied Powers. Triple Entente becomes the Allied Powers, okay? So the Allied powers include Great Britain, France, Russia, and then Serbia, Belgium, Montenegro, Romania, Greece, and Portugal. Japan wanted German territories in the Pacific. Germany had taken over a lot of islands in the Pacific, so Japan joined the war on on the side of the Allies because they wanted those German territories. Italy switched alliances, so they started as allied with Germany and Austria-Hungary, but then they switched alliances because the Allies promised Italy territories in Austria-Hungary when they won. Okay, so the Allies said, "Hey, you can have Austria-Hungary's, or you can have part of Austria-Hungary's territory when we win this war." So Italy's like, "Sure, I'll join this war." So they switch alliances and go to the Allies rather than the Central Powers. And then in 1917, the United States joins the war as well from there. Okay, that that kind of gets us into the beginning of World War I. We will talk more about it in the coming days. I just wanted to give an introduction now, so make sure that you have anything you need to written down there and turn that in. Okay, you'll have a good day.